My guest today is C Lou Hennig, who's worked in high-level program management since the 1980s and definitely qualifies as a giant. She's worked for some of the world's biggest and most famous companies. As technology has changed, so have the various risks that companies face, and as those change, we must change with them. If we're to believe the pundits, we're in a time of unprecedented change, as so-called artificial intelligence in its various forms is often seen as an essential component of corporate IT development. That and the cybersecurity landscape are the two topics that are the most media and therefore the most management frenzied. So how much is real and how much is hype? C Lou Hennig, welcome to Shoulders of Giants. Why don't you start us off with a couple of minutes about you and your subject?
Well, Nigel, thank you for having me. I grew up in technology in various forms, aerospace, commercial, off-highway. We were metal cutters. We always had rules and standards, and from there, the advent of computers incorporated into the automation, as well as the expansion of production and supply chain. So all of today's topics have history, and that's how I came to be today. I thought I had escaped the family business of cutting metal because metal is electrons. No, I'm afraid that what do I do today? I just move those electrons through pipes and networks.
I don't think I've ever heard it described like that before. I love that. So I'm giggling uncontrollably because it is so novel. I'm particularly interested in how and why people are so willing, even anxious, to jump on the so-called AI bandwagon while knowing so little about it. Do you know why that is?
I think it was an evolution, just like our systems. If you recall, decades ago, we used to make a product and we would test the product and we would thoroughly define the product, and then we would release the product for sale. Then two things happened. One was the advent of the internet, where things picked up velocity, so did communication. Maybe we weren't so good in our communication, as well as the understanding of the words and terminology we were using. The second piece is, from that internet connection, we moved quickly into phone sales. Phones today, the technology of phones is pretty pat. However, that last mile, they don't really do it in the lab. They don't test it. When you get a phone, it has a lot of bugs in the first release and pass, and that's okay for a phone. Massive numbers of people are using them, and it's debugged almost immediately. That doesn't happen in other technologies. The more complicated technologies that deal with the integration of systems, and then from one company or one industry to another, further complicates the awareness that you have to have in order to know, how good is this for me? So rather than ask questions, it's new, it's shiny, and I think fear of missing out is what we have right now in today's technology.
Then there's, against that level of what is essentially ignorance. And I can talk about it being ignorant because what I see today is a lot of the process-driven software that is being pushed around as being something novel actually is not doing anything significantly different from the expert systems that I worked on in the 1980s. They weren't really expert, but they were basically algorithm-driven products which were designed to produce a particular result, which is exactly what everyone's talking about now and calling artificial intelligence. So there's that, the lack of history and the lack of understanding of what it does, because people don't think to look back at what has gone before. But then we move on to your other, perhaps your big thing, which is cybersecurity. Why do people think they know everything and therefore place cybersecurity lower in their priorities than physical or even staff security?
That's an interesting question, and I think it's a combination. One is communication. Like I said earlier, communication and clear understanding, validated what the terms mean, are key. But here's the thing that I think people make the greatest mistake. There's a lot of fear in cybersecurity. Today's accountability models don't afford it. Business decisions are made based on what they desire the outcome to be, without really backing up and looking at the base architecture and configurations. Rather than communicate across many teams and to evaluate how we would make adjustments kind of like dropping a penny in a pond where you get that ripple. That isn't going on. It is artificial intelligence today. For me, the LLM, large language models, have nothing to do with the machine learning and AI that I grew up with internal to the system. It is more of a data approach. Think about it like web scraping or some of the other topics. And I think where we get into trouble is it's fascinating to have your hands on that amount of information. What's unfortunate is if you don't look where the information or the data is coming from, accidents happen. And I think it's the thrill.
This is exactly what we're seeing in financial crime. We're seeing that companies that ran with what they called artificial intelligence, which was simple algorithmic analysis. There was nothing clever about it at all. Then a lot of companies found that it was difficult to keep getting investment for that, by now recognized to be a very limited product. And so they came along with the idea that generative AI, having seen ChatGPT and the amount of fuss that created in the media, they said, oh, but we can use that. And they've tried to produce that as being either an upgrade or as a new product, and saying, we can solve everything that you do. The difficulty is they're still relying on data sets which are not necessarily the most accurate, probably not up to date. I mean, we know that ChatGPT regularly says, I'm sorry, my data is too old, I can't tell you that. So if they're using that type of model, then they're never going to be able to get the analysis that is necessary for proper risk management within the organization. So I agree with you absolutely. Data is key, and people are not paying enough attention to it.
Well, data's kind of like your garage or basement. People over time open the door and throw things in there. I have yet to walk into a shop where I am doing mitigation work of some type, global delivery, and they can't get it to go. I always back up and I look at the data structures for the simple reason that what used to work in legacy systems may not work today. But the second thing is how much cleanup. And there isn't a shop in the last 25 years that I've walked into that they're running a tight ship. It's like, well, we're going to get around to that. And unfortunately, technology can't access certain pieces. Or, well, we have Charles in the back and he goes over and gets that out of the other system. It's like, I have to say this, human beings across the board, when you consider a full life cycle, maintenance is part of it. And just like the 15-year-old that doesn't want to clean their room, so too are we. In fact, this last year, we just awarded $5 billion so we could shoot more satellites up into outer space because we're out of room. We didn't clean up the junk we left behind. It's just human beings. Look at our oceans. Look at whatever else we've got.
But it's more than human beings, isn't it? I mean, it must be 20 years ago when I annoyed many people in the technology industry by saying to bankers, go to all of your suppliers and say, we will not renew unless you convert us to one single open standard for data that we can access from every application.
Oh, now wait a minute. You're asking for a redo like SAP did. They standardized mainframe tables. It used to be, I used to have to sit down and interview because it was all in someone's head. Now we have a standard, SAP, Oracle, whatever. They got names for this stuff, receivables, payables, IDs, whatever. It is that same thing. However, the prioritization here again is to allocate budget to your organization. Instead of getting new and shiny, you're going to do, oh, gee, do I have to? You mean I have to clean it up first? And I will say this about the financial industry. Some of the dire needs that I have seen are from the financial industry. And it every time I look at it, I think, I would stomp a vendor for doing this to my data, or that would never fly in my organization. And I
And
just
that has
left
been
an oil and
been a
gas
problem.
company.
That's been a problem for a very long time. I worked in an insurance company where we had 3 systems: the current system, the previous system, and the one before that. And every, I think, I want to know what happened then. I want that data integrated. Well, that's just not, it's not economically feasible because the data is stored in a proprietary format. So I wanted all data to have one non-proprietary format. You can do what you like with your applications to access it. That's fine. You know, that's the stuff. That's what we're interested in. What we're not interested in is you walling off my data to say you can only have it if you buy our software to access it.
So the trend today is to move to, you never give data or allow data to reside on a third-party system unless it absolutely has to. It leaves your control. Not a good thing. The second thing is the three-legged stool. You have to have third-party risk management vetting processes in place with criteria that apply to the objective of the bank or the person that's going to engage the third party. Number 2, those engagement contracts must be written in a way to reference the standards and to create and define what the liability is in the data placement. And then second, make it a hot potato. It's my data. Do you see what I'm saying? And then the second thing is you have to have the gumption or the guts to go out there and say, you know what, I think our time has come and gone, and we are going to adopt another model where we have greater flexibility and we can look at truly the functions we need, because oftentimes vendors will trap you into a system because you can't get your data and walk away.
That's exactly what has happened. And we've seen so much wasted money and wasted effort. And what's even worse, when we need a continual picture, we have, in financial crime, we have to maintain a record of certain data relating to a particular customer for the life of the account.
Sure.
But with a company, that can be 50, 60, 70, 120 years. Now, I know that in the earlier cases, we're going to be looking at books, but we should be able to access the entire computerized history of that customer to be able to make a financial crime risk assessment. And currently, despite my pleas 20 years ago, that is still not happening. And we're still seeing, what worries me even more, we're seeing artificial intelligence companies coming along saying, why don't you use our software? And banks are buying 3 or 4 different sets of software.
Yes,
and
sir.
And the data, because they're comparing them as much as anything else, but also because they're recognizing that no one company can get it right. And then in addition to that, that means they've got multiple additional data banks, which may or may not be compatible. I'm not talking about technologically compatible. The actual data may not be compatible because the data sources may be different. So I see a massive problem with all of this looming once people get over the hype. And I'm never sure that that's going to happen. And my second concern is that each of these is a gateway into the bank systems. The cybersecurity risks of having multiple third-party providers accessing your data is incalculable.
Very risky. You have the whole surface area of the number of applications and your exposure. You have the number of people. I guess about 15 years ago, Gardner and I, the consulting gurus, had an argument, and they kept telling me, Cynthia, don't worry, insider deviation is only about 3%. Well, this year they came out and said 83%. It's not that every human being is ill-intended. It is human beings are make mistakes, get interrupted, don't go back and finish what they start, or they transition in their roles. There is 100 reasons besides maybe the 7% of bad actors. So in the end, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think that everyone is grasping at the straw to take a shortcut for, excuse me, for everything you just mentioned. I see it every time I walk in. It's like, oh, we're different. No, you're not. But the most important thing here is I don't think there is a shortcut. And I'm thinking perhaps I need to open up a janitorial business We'll just call it, you know, data janitorial. No chemicals required. But everybody knows this that has seen it. The problem with AI is it brings to the table added risk. And if you don't know what you're accessing or how you're doing it, I think just like the legal systems, the copyrights, some of the things we've seen where internal data gets outside and becomes external data, you are going to see train wrecks of massive proportions. But it's
I think
just
that,
an accident.
yeah, exactly. I want to talk about something quite different, really, in some respects.
Okay.
Not long ago, the big fad in IT was the cloud. And entire industries sprang up to sell cloud access and then to put services in the cloud through software as a service. And they all said, come to us, we'll manage your security. But
How's that working?
to my very uneducated eye, it seems that there's been an increase in large data breaches since the cloud became the norm. Is this a coincidence?
No, it's not. I grew up in the monolith stacks and, mainframes. But here's the thing. I grew up where I remember the days where you could not get a contract to take a company's data so that they didn't have to deal with it anymore unless it was single tenant. Clouds are multi-tenant. There's a reason. The only reason, and I look at this in the architecture when I engage, is the only reason I look at cloud and only use it as a tool is for horizontal or vertical scaling. If you don't have controls over the evenness of your demand in the systems use. Other than that, people are now shifting back to a combination of on-prem as well as cloud to cloud. That's a whole nother can of worms. I know some people so terrorized by the cloud that they don't have a good word to say about it. Clouds have a lot of configuration. One company, they have an S3 data bucket, and that still plagues them. It's not that hard. The instructions are published, but yet very few people know how to correctly configure that for the architecture that they're leveraging. And that's another lack. I used to walk into shops 30 years ago and see enterprise architects and then application architects and network architects. I don't see that anymore. Oh, there's an architect and the guy only knows about networks. Well, okay, so where's the app guy? Where's your data guy? They don't have that cohesive communications. So I'll go and say this one more time. The basics are key. Communications are key, and human beings don't do communications well.
So I think that's absolutely true in many respects. I mean, certainly, I find that if we go back to the thing about communicating with software, we know that that the results you're going to get out of a lot of these products is entirely dependent on the question you ask. And
Yes.
So the problem is, can you train your people to ask the right questions to get not the answer you want, but the correct answer, which may not be the same thing at all.
Well, here's the thing. That's called criteria in your TPRM vetting process. I always have a stack.
What's TPRM?
Third-party risk management vetting process. All vendors are vetted the same, and there might be 1,100 questions and only 50 apply to this vendor. But in the long and the short of it, asking the questions, and if they're well placed and well targeted, and there are experts out there, don't take my word for it, but I have literally been in meetings where the engineer of the sales team will look me square in the eye and say, I don't know what these gentlemen have told you, but Cynthia, we are not eating our own dog food. And they're terrified because they know what I'm asking about and they know I'll write it into the contract. So
how much of this has become more difficult because we see a massive growth in outsourcing of product development to people that don't stay in their jobs for more than a few months?
I think that that's huge contributing factor. I think that coupled with lack of training or specialization, and the velocity at which we move at, I don't know how anybody can be successful in attempting to provide a solution to a client at this point. What happens if your team changes over 50% in 6 months? What's that going to look like for you?
Well, I see programmers who are literally, they've been in their job a week and they're already advertising that they're available for new work. And I see programmers that will move, and I use the term programmer in the broadest sense. I see people that will move for the equivalent of £50 a month.
So let me ask you the question differently. If communications and language are key, the first building block, then I would suspect that moral compass moves around a bit. But I grew up in the generation that my word is my bond, yada, yada, yada. In the end, there has to be some deference to loyalty and to complete the job. If I say I'm going to complete, I stay. I may not like it, but I get her done. So the thing I question is, have we groomed an entire generation of resources, since there's no loyalty in the market and there's no loyalty within the companies? Have we groomed them to think the same way?
I think we've done worse than that. We have done that, definitely. But I think we've done worse than that. I think we have created a culture where we say to a company, we're going to hand off this development to you, and it's for you to deal with the staff. So the staff have no loyalty to you and me.
Yes. I agree. That is a huge contributing factor. The I don't know, I'm not included, I'm not part of the group. I think there's something to be said about being a little tribal, right?
Absolutely. I think we need that loyalty from the developer to the business that's commissioning. And that is lost through what is quite often multiple layers of subcontracting. They may not even know who they're working for ultimately. Like somebody in a construction site, all he knows is he's there to put bricks down. He doesn't know who's commissioned the building. What have been the top 5 attack, or what will be the top 5 attack vectors for 2024, do you think?
Okay, so I think we'll still have the usual human errors, malware, ransomware, social engineering. That's always a thing. But I think as we move forward, configuration and architecture are going to come into greater play, especially as you brought up those points along the data viability and its ability to interact with different systems. But there's one that I walk into every shop, and they either have a third party or they have no party. And the interesting thing is, it's around the DNS and the network. I think there's a culpable piece here for governments, as well as for, I've never been in a shop where I've been direct, oh, here's our DNS group and here's how we're running our systems. It doesn't exist. And that is probably the greatest, easiest maybe way for, I think, the next round to just explode. It's going to be exponential.
There is I hate to call it an action group, but there is some movement towards trying to deal with a long-standing problem on DNS that Microsoft is in some way to blame for. Apparently, I don't understand the technical details, and
see, everybody I talk to gives me the same. It's like, oh no, this stems from the advent of our systems back to ARPANET and back in the 40s and 50s. And we still don't have it right. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's like the dirty little secret. And there's some politics in there. And I think even if everybody did everything correctly, let's say we had the ideal resources and the best configuration and architecture, and we did our updates and configurations and we communicated well, you'd still have a side door open. And I think where that is going to become more relevant as the cyber wars heat up or as we have more global unrest?
There's always going to be a side door or back door. When I worked on, as I said,
Of course.
the I had the system in my own office, and I joined a firm that happened to have the same system. And one day they managed to get locked out of their system, and I said, "Well, go away. You don't want to see this." And I went in through my back door into their system. And how do you do that? You don't want to know. So one last question, really. What attack vectors are made worse by the liberal application of so-called AI, be it in-house or online?
Okay, with the state of technology as it is right this moment, I would say guard your children. None of them are safe. I think that there's equal opportunity and there will be favorites. And as events unfold or attacks unfold, just like anything else, they kind of rotate through the topics and they change up their styles and approaches. So I don't see that there is an abatement on any topic. SQL injections, I think, might become more voracious, but God help us all if they speed things up and a quantum does come online, the encryption piece, and then you have the velocity. I don't know if there's a way to even address those topics. So
I see the use of artificial intelligence tools for looking for fraud victims and creating fraud approaches for fraud. It's not doing anything new or novel. It's just doing it really fast.
right. It's like bank robbery. You don't need to get in the car and drive anymore. You can just key in. Now with AI,
if it doesn't go on fire or run over a pedestrian, yes.
Yes, exactly. So we're just changing the human behavior and approach, and the logic doesn't change. I think what really changes the tooling. But make no mistake, the way that AI, nothing is free. AI was introduced as the large language models. I'm talking here, not back end ML AI. But they were just kind of dumped out there. Find a product, find a use. There was no value proposition. It was like, here, the first one's free. Nothing is free. That's been my experience in life. And I believe that there is a larger agenda around knowledge is power, data is gold. And what would you do if you could enlist the entire global tech community or sales and marketing, not that smart as far as technological awareness, and they just start feeding you data? Because if you look at the engagement contracts, when I read them, I almost fell out of my chair. They're much like the cloud contracts. They're not accountable, and they get copy of whatever data their tool touches. Think about that a minute.
Well, I think people should think about it for much longer than 1 minute. C Lou Hennig, thank you very much for your time. Very pleased to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Nigel. It's been a joy.